Hi, today I'll show you how to integrate Drupal with Okta. In our use case, we'll be using Drupal as a SP or service provider, and we'll be using Okta as an IDP or identity provider. The first thing that you'll need to do is download the SimpleSAMLphp library, which we'll be using for our integration. So the latest version is available from this URL, from the download URL. Download the latest version and put it up in your root folder. As you can see here in the path, so I have it in the /var www.html SimpleSAMLphp. So download this file and rename it as SimpleSAMLphp. So that will be your first step. Next, I also have my Drupal instance ready, and I'm calling it Okta SSO. As you can see here, so I have Okta SSO also installed here. The first part that we need to do is we need to make sure that the SimpleSAMLphp library, it's available within the same domain as the one that we are using. So this is the URL that I'm using for my Drupal 7 website. So I'll need to make sure that when I go to /SimpleSAML, I have the library installed. For that, we'll have to make some changes in the config file. Let's take a look at the config file. Let's go to the config file. My config file is called as Okta SSO. Let's go there. As you can see here, all the basic settings are same. So you have the domain name and you have your document role. What you need to observe is the alias that you have here. So the alias here is when it says /SimpleSAML, it goes to this particular path where we have a SimpleSAML installed. So it means when you have the URL SimpleSAML, it will be looking at this particular directory here. So that is the configuration that we need to do. Once we are done with the configuration, you can go to this particular URL just to make sure that you have SimpleSAML installed. So now I have the basic configurations already done. If you haven't done your configurations, we might need to make some changes. So the first thing that we need to do is we'll have to go to the config.php file, and the path for that will be SimpleSAMLphp config/config. So here you have various settings. So the most noteworthy of that will be base URL path. If you are installing your website in the same URL, it will be the default value and you need not make any changes. And if you are going to use certificates, you'll have to mention the certificate directory here. We'll have to create a certificate using the OpenSSL. So let me just show you that as well. So if you look at the /cert folder, you have both the certificate and the .pm file here. Okay, we need to mention only the cert directory here, and we can leave all the other values as is. Make sure that you enter the admin password, and you also change the secret salt to something that you know, and make sure that you enter the technical contact name and your email here, so that if there are any emails about debugging or logging that SimpleSAML sends, it reaches you and it will be easier for you to debug. So those are the basic settings that you need to do in config.php. Once you do those settings, you will be able to log in here as an admin. The password, the auth admin password that you set here, you will need that for logging in as an admin here. And once you are done with that, we'll have to make some changes in the config auth sources. So auth sources is the file where you declare your SP or the service provider. So in our case, it's going to be Drupal. And as we discussed in the previous config file, we mentioned the certificates. So when we are setting the values here, we will need to set the private key and the certificate here. So the .pm corresponds to private key and .crt corresponds to the certificate key. And you can it's better to add an entity ID for your service provider. In my case, I'm calling it as Okta SSO Drupal. By default, you'll have this particular URL as the IDP, You can leave this as null as well, so that you will have a list of IDPs that you can select. But by default, if you specify any one of the IDPs here or identity providers here, it will be easier. Before going ahead, let's go ahead and create an account here. So in our first example, we'll be using OpenIDP as a identity provider. So you can just log into OpenIDP and create an account. So once you create an account and you log in, we'll need to add the data for service providers. Since this will be acting as our identity provider, it has to know about our service provider so that it can authenticate it. So go to managing service providers. It will take you to this URL, and there's add new entity, which will use to add our service provider. So let me just edit the existing entry here. So we'll need to give an entity ID, and the entity ID will be whatever we give here, so it has to be the same thing. So enter that here, and you can add a service name and a service description. And once you go to the SAML 2.0, you'll have to enter the endpoints for assertion consumer service and single logout service. So these are the standard URLs that we get from SimpleSAML. So it will be SAML2-ACS and SAML2-logout.php. So these are the two URLs that we'll need to add. So once you have added that, you can save it. And now what we have done is we have given the information about our service provider in our IDP. Similarly, we'll also need to add information about our IDP in the service provider. That will be doing it in the control. Will be in our SimpleSAMLphp under metadata, and under metadata, since we are using SAML 2.0, so SAML 2.0, there are options for having a hosted IDP, which means that you can host it yourself or you can have it as a remote IDP. So in our case, since we're using a remote IDP, let's select the IDP remote.php. In fact, SimpleSAMLphp comes with a default for OpenIDP, so you can use it as is without changing anything. You'll just need to make sure that you give this key in your SP config. That will be under your auth sources. As you can see here, I have added this as my IDP. So once you are done with these steps, now we'll need to go to our SimpleSAML. So go to SimpleSAML, and you have various tabs. As you can see here, go to authentication, and when you go to authentication, there's an option for test configured authentication sources, and this is the default service provider which authenticates with OpenIDP. Click on that. Now since I'm already logged in, it is showing all these details. Let me just log out and show you how the screen would look like. So let's go to installation page, go to authentication, click on this and go to default SP. When you click on this, it should redirect you to the IDP. So this is the IDP that I'm using, OpenIDP, and this is my username and password. Let me click on login. Once you click on login, IDP authenticates you and sends the request back to our website. As you can see here, it has already authenticated and sent few attributes. So these are the important things that are sent by your IDP. It not only authenticates but also sends some additional details which are called as attributes, which you can use within your site. So now as you can see, what we have done is we have installed SimpleSAMLphp on our site. We created an account on OpenIDP. We entered the data about our service provider in IDP, and we entered the data about IDP in our service provider. So these are the steps we have done. So this makes sure that there can be a proper handshake that can happen between the service provider and IDP. So the moment you see this, which means that you have set up your SimpleSAML correctly, and it's also authenticating with the IDP. So I have selected OpenIDP as the first IDP since it is very easy and straightforward. We can also do similarly with Okta as well. So now let's look at how we'll do this with Okta and also on Drupal side. So now let's get back to our Drupal website. So in Drupal we have a module called as SimpleSAMLphp authentication. You just need to download this module and enable as you do with any other module. Once you are done with that, then you can go to the settings for that SAML. And as you can see here, please make sure that you do not enable this activate authentication initially, because if you have done some mistakes with your settings, it can log the user out of Drupal website. In case if you get logged out, you can always use drush variable set to disable this option, in case if you're not able to have a look at the GUI. So here we specify what is our installation directory, and we'll also specify what is the SP ID that we're using. So that one will get it from auth sources. As you can see here, the key is default SP, so that's what you are mentioning here. In case if you're using something else, you can mention it here. And as you can see here, these are the various attributes that Drupal site will use. Let's just get back to this and I'll show you what it means. So as you can see here, it gives us various attributes, right? So similarly, Drupal uses few of these attributes. So for example, what should it use for a user's name? What should it use for uniquely identifying the user and for mail ID? So you can mention all these things based on the output that you get from here. So when you come here, so these are the things that you get from the IDP. So those things you can use it for your Drupal site. So you can mention those things here. Once you check out these attributes, you can use these things appropriately. Okay, so there are various settings for user provisioning. For example, when it's what it means is you are authenticating from IDP, but you don't have an account on Drupal, so whether the user should be prompted for creating an account. So that's one setting. And similarly, you can also have both the kind of authentications enabled. You can also enable, you can also allow the users to log in with the username and passwords, and you can say users with which role should be able to do that, or particular users, you can do that as well. And you can also specify after logging out what should be the URL that should the user should be redirected to. So once you are done with these settings, save the configurations. So now this is the first part of Drupal settings. So once we are done with this, now we need to do the part that is in Okta. So go to your Okta account and go to your admin settings. So once you go to your admin settings, you can go to applications, and within applications there's an option for add application. In add application, go to create new application and select SAML 2.0. Once you select SAML 2.0, you can just enter the app name, app logo, and app visibility. If you're not aware of what these variables are, you can look at the help text, and for now you initially you can just put these things here and then just go ahead and create an app. So once you're done with creating an app, it will look something like this. You'll have a general setting. So you can give any application label that you want here. For all the three, postback URL, recipient, and also destination, make sure that you give the same URL that we get from the SimpleSAML. So that will be SimpleSAML module.php/SAML/sp/SAML2acs/php.default/sp. This is the URL. Make sure that you give the same URL for all the three fields. And for the name ID format, select transient. Recipient, as I told you, it will be the same URL. And audience restriction is something that you need to be careful. So in your auth_sources.php file you would have given an entity ID, so you'll have to make sure that you give the same ID here for the audience restriction. And for auth context class reference, the better thing would be to start with password protected transport, and then we can look at other options. And make sure that your response and assertion are signed and your request is uncompressed. And there's also a default relay state. This is a parameter that tells you which URL it should go to after the authentication is done. And it becomes very important in IDP, that is IDP initiated workflow. So when you log into your Okta and then sign in for this particular app, it will take you to this URL. And then attribute elements, so these are the various attribute elements that will be passed in the response. And you can get a list of all these values from the settings here. Go to sign on, and in your sign on there's an option for view setup instructions. When you go to setup instructions, you have all the attributes that will be available to you. So these are the few basic attributes that are available, base attributes. And similarly from LDP you have few other attributes, and from Active Directory and Workday you have similar attributes. So you can select which are the attributes that needs to be passed in the authentication response. As you can see here, I have set just user email ID to be passed in the authentication response. So the user's email ID will be passed in this authentication. And when you go to Drupal, so I have used UID itself for all the three options just for testing. Similarly, once you have everything working, then you can pass additional variables or additional attributes here, and you can use them on your Drupal side. So now that we have set up Okta and we have also set up Drupal to log in, and let's enable activate authentication via SimpleSAML here. So once you are done with this, let's go to a new window. So in the new window, once you enable the SAML login, you'll have something called as federated login here. Once you click on this, it will take you to your Okta. We have still kept it as OpenIDP. Let's go and change it in our auth sources. Okay, so we are in auth sources. Let's change it from our OpenIDP to Okta. So as you can see here, this is the IDP. I haven't shown you the settings that we need, how we need to import the settings. So for that, what you can do is, once you're done with setting up your Okta account, so go to sign on, and in sign on click on view setup instructions, and it will take you to this. And at the bottom you have the important data that you need for service provider integration. So this is the external key. You have all the important data here, and now you need to use this XML data that is here. You can use this to import it into your service provider. SimpleSAML, there is a URL for metadata converter. So go to that particular URL, that will be admin metadata converter. And what you can do is you can copy paste your XML from here and paste it here, and then click on parse. So once you click on parse, it gives you the PHP code that is required, which you can copy paste into your list of IDPs. So your list of IDPs will be in your metadata, that will be SAML20 IDP remote PHP. As you can see here, I have copy pasted the same data here. So whatever data you get from there, you can just copy paste it here, and then you'll have to go to your auth sources and change your key here. So change your IDP to Okta key. So that is the key that will be used in the listing here. So this is the key. Just copy paste this key to your IDP key here. So once you are done with all these settings, let's go to a new site. Let's click on federated login. So as you can see here, now it's taking us to the Okta page. So as you see, it has taken me back to the Drupal side. So it was a service SP initiated workflow. So first it came to the Drupal side, then the request was sent to the IDP, and then it is back to the browser again. So this completes the workflow. We did miss out on one of the critical things. By default, SimpleSAML uses session variables, so that can be configured in your config.php. So let's go to the store. By default, store.type will be set to PHP session. When you're checking out SimpleSAMLphp installation, you can keep it for PHP session itself. But when you want to try it out with Drupal, you'll have to make sure that you change this to SQL. And also, once you change it to SQL, there are a few things like SQL. You need to give the DSN here. Store.sql.dsn will be this particular thing. First we say it's MySQL and host is localhost, and then we say what is the DB name, and similarly we need to pass the username and password also. So this is the only addition that you need to do for the Drupal. Other than that, everything remains the same. Thank you very much for watching the video.